This is a brief discussion of adulthood, cognitive development, and an overview of Chapter 21 in your textbook. Have you ever been told that your brain stops developing by the time you're 18? Do you believe this to be true? Let's see. How would you define intelligence? If I'm an artist, does it matter to me if I can understand theoretical physics? Does an engineer define intelligence the same way as a historian? Many associate intelligence, which we still haven't defined, and maybe will by the end of this talk, with IQ. IQ is a numeric value of one's performance on a test. The test has been refined over the years to keep good questions and to drop bad questions. If we measure what you know, that doesn't tell us your ability to learn. It might tell us more about the schools that you attended or how much your parents valued education. Your socioeconomic status might tell us a little about your genetics. An IQ test measures your visual spatial processing, your auditory processing, and your short-term memory and how fast you process information. It is a predictor of performance, but it can be wrong and it can be impacted by things like language. If you are having to take an IQ test in a language that's not your first language, chances are you're not going to do as well on it. IQ tests measure general knowledge, or G. Spearman believed that there was one general intelligence factor and that it could be measured under what he called G. To him, it didn't matter if you were an artist or an engineer. There was one score that measured intelligence. He did develop factor analysis, which you will learn more about in psychology, research, and statistics. Factor analysis tells you how items relate to each other and are observed and correlated. And he thought you could take that information, put it together, and come up with one score for intelligence. Your chapter gives you two different studies to think about and consider. One talked about cross-sectional designs, and it's in a section labeled Who is Smarter, College Students or the Retiree? And they found that age may not be the primary factor in intelligence. Certainly, intelligence seemed to be impacted by improved education, increased information, and better health as all important factors. The longitudinal results could be somewhat inaccurate. The other study was a Seattle longitudinal study, and this is an interesting study because the researcher added participants over time, and he added a new group every 7 years. And what you will see in your textbook is two graphs, one of women and one of men in 5 different areas. And the 5 different areas are numbers, spatial orientation, word fluency, inductive reasoning, and verbal meaning. The cross-sectional research showed declines in intelligence, but longitudinal research showed some improvement in adulthood. What this researcher did find is that men and women were different in what their areas were that they were high in. So women were higher in verbal, men were higher in numbers. But as they grew older, those came together so that they were more alike. And then they found that most people had declined in at least one of these areas by the time they were 60 years old. And at least one of their abilities, but not everyone did. But usually by the time they were 70, pretty much everyone had declined from their earlier scores in all 5 of the areas, which is to say that we are not as intellectually sharp as we age as we were when we were young. And there are some great books out there, largely about people that are mathematicians, and you should go take a look at. But they talk about these people who were just brilliant in their youth. And by the time they were 40, all the fresh ideas that came so easily had stopped coming. It is worth taking a look at those books just to know how the mind works and how even superintelligence declines with age. In the 1960s, Raymond Cattell worked with one of his graduate students, John Horn, to study intelligence tests. And through their tests, they came up with 2 clusters of types of intelligence. One was fluid and the other was crystallized. And these are pretty self-explanatory if you think about it. Fluid intelligence are those types of basic intelligence that make learning of all sorts quick and thorough. So it flows. They are things like short-term memory, abstract thought, and the speed at which you can think. The second type was crystallized intelligence, and those are types of intellectual ability that reflect accumulated learning, and thus they increase as you get older. They're things like your vocabulary and your general information. All those facts that you pick up over time, the words that you pick up, the more books you read, the more words you learn. One of the great things about the way many people read now is they read on electronic devices, and if you don't know a word, you just click on it and it tells you the meaning. Prior to this, if people didn't want a word, they had to go get a dictionary and find out what the meaning was. And there are people that are very intellectually curious that will always do that. But there are people that just want to read and get through it quickly, and they think, oh, I'll come back to it and figure out exactly what that was, and they never do. Crystallized intelligence is that type of intelligence you get from all the facts you accumulate over your life. So, the longer you live, the more facts you know, the better your crystal intelligence. Robert Steinberg identified 3 types of intelligence: analytic intelligence, creative intelligence, and practical intelligence. And which of these is important to you may be dependent on both your culture and your age. Analytic intelligence is academic problem solving and computation. Creative intelligence is more the imaginative and the innovative problem solving. And then practical intelligence is what people refer to as street smart or common sense. What we really know is that these 3 actually go together. There are benefits to practical intelligence, and it's obvious when you're talking to adults. But it is rare that you see people that have high analytic intelligence and no practical intelligence. Or you see people that are have high creative intelligence and they have low analytic intelligence. Certainly, we have different things that we are good at, uh, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have one without the other. If you've ever watched a really funny comedian, the ones that are able to act and interact with their audience, it is really obvious that they are high in analytic intelligence as well as creative intelligence. And if you imagine the people that figure out how to build a bridge across the San Francisco Bay, it's certainly obvious that they have practical intelligence, creative intelligence, and analytic intelligence. So I would suggest that all three go together, and what's important to you may depend on your culture, and it may depend on your age. One of the examples your book says is it says that you may not, as you advance in your career, need to figure out how to do number sequence problems or these analytic identifying factors that may result in something else happening. I would suggest you chose nursing, so you absolutely will need to maintain that throughout your life. Certainly, if you're working in an ICU, you are looking at a lot of data coming in, and you have to interpret that data and act because you need to know what the next sequence will be. What you will be doing isn't about common sense, although I think that's always important, but it's about analytic intelligence and sometimes creative intelligence. Have you ever been told by people that they are good at multitasking? As soon as somebody tells you that, the answer in your head should be, no, you're not. No one is really good at multitasking. Anytime you add a task that distracts you from the one at hand, it will slow down your ability to do both. It's not even a close call that multitasking really does not work. And it isn't just multitasking. You're doing your homework, you're studying for a class, and reading a book, and at the same time, you're working math problems for a different class. You really can't do that. Likewise, you will have people that are trying to work on a paper, for example, and at the same time, your cell phone's there, and you keep checking it. You keep checking cell phone messages, text messages, and so forth. That is also a form of multitasking. Watching TV while studying, a form of multitasking. It doesn't work. It's not even a close call that it doesn't work. Therefore, I would suggest that it really is important for people to learn to give their attention to the thing in front of them, which means practicing concentration and giving your full attention to one task at a time. I once wrote an article on subject matter experts, fact or fiction, largely because I saw so many people that considered them experts or sold themselves as experts to the news media that in fact were probably not. One of the questions is, how do we define expertise? It is someone with specialized skills and knowledge developed around a particular activity or area. There will be a day when you're an expert nurse. And when that day comes, you will realize that you have intuitive, automatic, strategic, and flexible approaches to your work. Intuitive is that knowing what you do and making decisions based on your expertise and knowledge may seem intuitive to outsiders, but to you it's taking all the pieces of the puzzle and putting them together to make a decision. It may not seem like it's intuitive to you. You may even have a hard time explaining to others why you made the decision you made. But you do it because of all the knowledge, skills, and practice that you have had. Automatic is speaking to the knowledge and skills that make tasks routine. Here is my example for you as nursing students. There will be a day when you move into your clinical practice that you are going to be asked to do something that's a care plan or a care map. The language of what we call these changes over time. And you will find them very difficult. And you will basically obsess about them, spend sleepless nights working on them, and find them somewhat stressful and upsetting. But 6 months after you graduate and you're practicing, you will wonder why you ever thought it was hard. And it's because it will become routine. Strategic is the ability to plan ahead or to play as you practice. One of the ways that this is one of those cases where sports is a great analogy. The reason sports teams practice is so when they play, they can be strategic. They have tried out what works. And they know how to then make the next best play. And then there's always the importance of being flexible and the ability to adapt to individual cases. And the ability to be flexible and adapt really comes when you're already intuitive, automatic, and strategic. Then it's easy to be flexible. We are now back to where we began. So what is intelligence? Intelligence is the ability to learn from experience, solve problems, and use knowledge to adapt to new experiences. Your intelligence is growing every day when you're in college. I hope you take every opportunity to learn and to recognize that this is a great time of growth for you.